So I'm going to talk about the year that I spent at a high-tech startup that was almost entirely staffed by members of the Church of Scientology. So, uh, do you recognize this man? Well, yeah, it's L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology, and I did not recognize this man. Um, there was a giant photo of L. Ron Hubbard hanging up in the lobby of this little software company in Clearwater, Florida, that I came down from Seattle. I was living in Seattle at the time. Came down from Seattle to interview at. I'm from Florida. I grew up there, and I was looking to move back to Florida to be closer to my family. Um, and this company had expressed a lot of interest in hiring me. And so I showed up there. There's this giant picture of what turned out to be L. Ron Hubbard in their lobby, but I was ignorant to the ways, so I did not recognize that picture hung up in their atrium. Uh, I was naive, and I assumed it must have been a picture of the company's founder. Who else could be that vain? So I was there for an interview. And yeah, like I just said, I was living in Seattle, and I was excited for a chance to work at a startup made of other ex-Microsoft engineers. That's why I was in Seattle. I was working for Microsoft. And these other Microsoft engineers had decided to move to Florida to start a company there. I wanted to return to Florida for family reasons, so I didn't realize that my future coworkers had moved there for religious reasons. I just assumed that they either also had family or just liked the weather there better because, Seattle really does rain all the time. So I didn't realize it at the time, but, taking this job would ultimately mean embarking on a journey of discovery into precisely what Scientology is and why it meant so much to the people that founded this little company. I first began to pick up on the Scientology-esque nature of the business after they insisted that I take a personality test as a new hire. This picture is not of the actual test that I was given, but it's likely to be the same test, because this is also a Scientology related personality test cover page that you're seeing here. Because the test was lengthy, I asked if I could take it home and complete it there. The founder of the company, a man named Paul McDaniel, told me that would be fine. I refused to take it. So I took it home and did some research on particularly a personality test. My American father had advised not to take a personality test from an employer, and he never told me why. He never explained why he gave that advice, but this is the first job I ever had where anyone had asked for anything like that. And so I decided to go look up details of this personality test. I just entered some of the questions that were on the test into the internet search box, and discovered that what I had been given was a personality test that was linked to Scientology recruitment. And of course, that's when I realized who the big giant picture in the lobby had been of. Oh, okay. So I decided that I was going to refuse to take the test on the grounds that it was a religious test and not something that they actually needed for me to do for my job capacity. Eventually, and I'd say eventually was about 2 or 3 days. Eventually, they dropped their demand that I take the test, but they were very insistent. I heard of them talking about not knowing where I would fall on the tone scale if I didn't take this quiz. And that, I overheard them saying that. And then I saw this poster in the break room of what the Scientologists call the tone scale of moods. They believe that there's 99 different possible moods, and they give them all a value to the decimal. that a human can have. This of course, it comes from L. Ron Hubbard. So I soon realized that most of the other employees had, like myself, actually worked at Microsoft, but unlike myself, they had been drawn specifically to Clearwater, Florida, by the presence of the Church of Scientology. More on why during the history lesson I'll go into a bit later. So, in fact, out of 15 total employees of the startup, I was one of only 3 who were not Scientologists. And one of those was the receptionist, and one of those was a guy from Brazil on H-1B visa that can't leave. It's like, oh, it's where you found yourself. Realizing that I didn't know much about Scientology myself, I decided to do some research. So this is what I've learned. I started at websites like zemu.net and Wikipedia, but I also tried to have some conversations with my actual Scientologist coworkers as much as they were willing to share, and for me, just expressing a sense of curiosity. So the so-called Church of Scientology was founded in 1952 by science fiction writer L. Ron Hubbard, who was the author of numerous pulp sci-fi serials from the 30s and 40s. His works were published in places like Thrilling Adventures, Unknown Magazine, Astounding Magazine. In 1948, L. Ron Hubbard supposedly told guests at a science fiction convention, writing for a penny a word is ridiculous. If a man really wants to make $1 million, the best way to do that is to start their own religion. So Scientology sprang from an earlier mental health philosophy that was also created by L. Ron Hubbard called Dianetics. The first book describing Dianetics was published in 1950, so that's just 2 years before Scientology, and made claims that would later become part of Scientology, such as bad experiences could embed themselves into your mind as what they called an engram. Engrams could be cleared from the body through a process of auditing, which is a form of psychiatric counseling. The service of auditing would be billed at rather substantial fees. And once you are clear, a person was claimed to be would be free of both mental and physical illness, have perfect mental recall, etc., etc. Scientology arose as a religion in 1953 after Hubbard refined some of the principles of Dianetics. So he argued that, and again, so this information isn't revealed immediately, but these ideas of engrams that came out of Dianetics were sort of recast with aliens behind them. So rather than bad experiences, your mind is embedded with body thetans, they call it. And body thetans are essentially disembodied souls that can inhabit human bodies. Some body thetans are from Earth, and some are from extraterrestrial origin. A person could be cleared of these body thetans and even harness the thetans within them to become what they call an operating thetan, or OT, which would grant you special powers to harness the body thetans within others. So they actually would teach that you can control the minds of others by controlling their body thetans. Auditing is used to clear people in Scientology, involved also a device called an e-meter, which was claimed to reveal the innermost thoughts in a vaguely lie detector-like fashion. It's essentially just electrodes that you grab, and it measures your body electricity, and whichever way the needle wiggles, the auditor will find some sort of pithy explanation for that. The clearing process also involves body purifications that can involve hot baths, special elixirs, bath salts. And there was actually a famous case about, at this point, like 2 decades ago, where someone died during a Scientology ritual purification. And many Scientology centers would perform this auditing in a church-like atmosphere. So Scientology versus psychiatry. So Scientology teaches that human souls are perfect and that any mental issues that you may have, any imperfections in your mind, which could range from anything like anger problems or depression or even full-blown mental illness, they believe that this is all the result of body thetans. This is body thetans poisoning your mind. So scientists therefore reject psychiatry, psychiatric medicine, and mental health counseling as fundamentally flawed because they don't address what Scientologists believe is the root cause of all these issues, the body thetans. In 2005, celebrity Scientologist Tom Cruise famously attacked psychiatry and the safety of antidepressant medicine on the Today Show because Tom Cruise is one of the most famous Scientology adherents out there. And actually, this is something that I just recently read and put into this presentation. Back in 1947, before L. Ron Hubbard created Dianetics or Scientology, he actually sought psychiatric help for depression and thoughts of suicide. And according to Russell Miller, the author of an expose on Scientology, Hubbard became critical of Scientology after a psychiatrist recommended that he be institutionalized in 1951. Well, I don't know. That might make me a little upset about psychiatry as well. Due to persecution, L. Ron Hubbard left the United States in 1967 in order to live at sea for the next 9 years. Many people were describing Scientology as a cult or a fraud. Scientology was being investigated by the U.S. government for excessive embezzling of church funds by Hubbard and for the safety of these religious purifications. And countries outside of the United States denied Scientology's status as a religion. It might even still be the case today. It certainly was back at that time, that the United States is the only country recognizing Scientology as a religion. In 1967, Hubbard decided to buy a fleet of ships and live in international waters with his family and most loyal followers as part of what he called the Sea Organization, or shortened to Sea Org, which still exists today. So L. Ron Hubbard asked his most loyal followers to accompany him to live in international waters. Followers who accompanied him were asked to sign a billion-year contract to serve Scientology because, Scientology does believe in an immortal soul. So, and they'd like your immortal soul for the next billion years, please. And while at sea, Hubbard wrote most of the operating Thetan canon of the church, which is a space saga involving a galactic overlord named Xenu, who supposedly brought billions of aliens to Earth, which was at that time called TGA, using modified D-7 airplanes, outfitted for space travel, of course, placed them around volcanoes, and then destroyed them with nuclear bombs. It definitely sounds like pulp sci-fi to me. In 1975, Hubbard returned to dry land, came ashore, initially at Daytona Beach, Florida, but I guess the spring breakers didn't want him there. And he ended up establishing Clearwater, Florida, north of Tampa on the other coast, as the Scientology headquarters. Staying at sea was becoming an issue due to Hubbard's increasing health problems. The USA was still the only country recognizing Scientology as a religion, so Hubbard was sort of obliged to return here. And initially the Scientologists moved into a hotel in Daytona Beach, but then it conducted what they called Operation Normandy to identify a small town in Florida which could be co-opted by Scientology. Clearwater outside Tampa was chosen, and the historic Fort Harrison Hotel in Clearwater was purchased to become the original headquarters building. And today, Clearwater is still the only place in the country where Scientologists can learn the most advanced operating Thetan teachings of the church. So, you can't, if you're a celebrity in LA, you can't get that level of training out there. You have to come to Florida to do that. And in fact, I remember when I was living in Clearwater that they were talking on the news about how the little Clearwater municipal airport, the majority of its private jet traffic for people coming from LA to Clearwater to presumably receive Scientology training. So today, Clearwater remains a hub of Scientology, and here's just a few selected buildings. We have the church that's in the middle of their downtown. That's along with the columns. What they now call the Flag Center, which was the former Fort Harrison Hotel. That was their original headquarters when they came ashore in 75. And then what they call the Superpower Center, or simply the Superpower, which is their current headquarters. That's a building that they had built circa the year 2000. Let's talk about Scientology recruitment mechanisms. So they're Scientology churches and centers. They're found in most major U.S. cities, including Atlanta. If you haven't been past it, there is a big Scientology church in Atlanta just off of, I believe it's Roswell Road in the Sandy Springs, or just south of Sandy Springs, south of 285. Just FYI. And often Scientology personality tests will be handed out on the street in front of them. When I was in LA, I encountered people doing that in front of the Scientology Center in LA. There's a special celebrity center in LA also. And L. Ron Hubbard, LRH, himself said that converting famous people would add to the credibility of his religion. They also recruit through drug and alcohol treatment programs. If you weren't aware of both Al and Non, and that is not to be confused with Alcoholics Anonymous, but there is an organization called Al-Anon and Narc-Anon. Those are Scientology-run organizations. So you will encounter some level of Scientology recruitment if you get treatment at those places. And then there's also the World Institute of Scientology Enterprises, or WISE. These are Scientology-run small businesses where probably legal workplace recruitment is conducted. And I did have a chance to phone through a WISE organization directory while I was working for Fortis Software, and the majority of WISC small companies were doctors' offices, legal offices, and chiropractors. That seemed to make up a big chunk of what was in the WISC list of member organizations. So becoming a Scientologist. Some were attracted because they read Dianetics or other L. Ron Hubbard literature. Others took the personality test. And no matter how you perform on this test, you'll be told that you have mental disturbances that could benefit from Scientology all the day. Once you decide Scientology is for you, you embark on what they call the Bridge to Total Freedom. This is a regimented procedure of auditing, training, reading, and purifications that are necessary, they say, to purge you of these body fakes. Progressing to each level requires that you pass FINDUS and confidentiality agreements for the current level. L. Ron was quoted as saying in one of his books that if you learn the Scientology canon out of order, you will not be able to accept it. You have to be taught it in a certain order that allows you to accept the next crazy claim after the previous crazy claim, so you can build up to it rather than get to the craziest claims at the beginning. Also, progressing through this bridge can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars in auditing and church fees. Of course, if you can't afford the hundreds of thousands of dollars it takes to advance down the bridge, you can always still sign that deleting your contract to join the Sea Org. The Sea Org didn't go away, they're just no longer at sea. Despite being no longer at sea, they still exist to provide free labor for the church in exchange for free Scientology, auditing, training, and possibly also a place to live. Sea Org members were issued a uniform, and if you ever go to downtown Clearwater, Florida, you will see people walking around downtown Clearwater wearing these green uniforms, and they'll be given a barracks to live at inside Scientology buildings. Sea Org members sometimes escape, claiming they had been subjected to such horrors as being chained to boilers in the basement of the Fort Harrison Hotel. In 2003, when I was living in Clearwater, the Clearwater police executed a search warrant on the Fort Harrison Hotel Flag Center, looking for people chained up in the basement, but didn't find anyone. But apparently, they were tipped off that was happening. Because of the expense involved in progressing, Scientology mainly attracts the wealthy. A Scientology church used to be just down the street from the Microsoft campus in Redmond, Washington, where I used to work. I would pass it regularly, but it's no longer there. Actually, Microsoft now owns the property that it used to be on, but I just remember passing it every day coming into work. The founders of the company I joined had been converted to Scientology by that very church, which was, of course, actively recruiting Microsoft millionaire employees, such as the ones who would end up starting this business in Clearwater. Scientology celebrity centers serve a dual role of filling L. Ron Hubbard's order that Scientology be promoted to celebrities, and for the purpose of making Scientology seem a more mainstream religion, and also serve the purpose of making money for these wealthy celebrities who can actually afford Scientology auditing, training, and purifications. Selected celebrities that are in Scientology, and as far as I know, these people are all still in Scientology today, are Kirstie Alley, Tom Cruise, John Travolta, Isaac Hayes, Elizabeth Moss, Greta Van Susteren, and Edgar Winter. Once you join Scientology, if you leave it, you'll become an apostate. Scientology forbids its members from associating with what it deems suppressive persons, or people who have negative opinions about Scientology. Anyone who joins Scientology and then later decides to leave is automatically deemed to be a suppressive person. The rule that you must cut suppressive people out of your life applies to everyone, including members of your family. Those who leave Scientology often face estrangement from their parents, siblings, or even their children. And this, in fact, happened to some of the people that I worked with, and we'll get to that in a moment. Some famous people who left Scientology after years of being active include Lisa Marie Presley, Nicole Kidman, who was famously with Tom Cruise, Mimi Rogers, Juliette Lewis, Sharon Stone, Neil Gaiman. I did not know that Neil Gaiman he was actually raised in Scientology and then decided that he couldn't accept it when he became an adult. And Jason Begg. So more about my personal experience. So the company I worked for was called Fortis Software. It was founded by a Mr. Paul McDaniel, an ex-Microsoft engineer. We moved his family from Seattle to Clearwater to be closer to the mother church. The main contract that his company had was to maintain Scientology.org. They also had a big contract with T-Mobile from their T-Mobile hotspots. You may remember these commercials in the early 2000s. The drivers and technology behind the T-Mobile hotspot was actually developed by Fortis Software. I work on anti-spam Outlook plugin that they created called I Hate Spam. They did not let me work on Scientology.org because I wasn't a Scientologist. I was perfectly happy with that. So Scientologists will often use Scientology speak, which is found in the Dianetics and Scientology-related books in general. This is sort of a modified version of English where a lot of the words have slightly different meanings, and it can be hard to understand what people are saying to each other when they use the Scientology speak. But yes, frequently when I was working there, people, would communicate using the Scientology speak with each other, and you'd just be sort of vaguely aware of what they're talking about. Some of my coworkers have been raised in Scientology, but some were a bit lapsed in their faith. There was a guy who worked in the cubicle next to me. I would often overhear phone calls between him and his father. His father was apparently upset that his son wasn't progressing down the bridge, wasn't taking the auditing sessions and things like that. And I distinctly remember him screaming to his dad over the phone, "If you want me to do this, you pay for it." I distinctly remember it. Um, and so at one point, we had a major problem with our contract with T-Mobile, resulting in them threatening to fire us as a subcontractor. As a result, the boss, Mr. Paul McDaniel, took all the employees who were working on that project. I was not one of them. I was on that I Hate Spam thing. The Texas for a month to work at the T-Mobile offices there and prove how serious Forbes was about fixing the issues. But Paul had duties of the superpower that he could not shirk. So what was happening is that he and like half the people in the office supposedly were going to Texas for a month, but yet Mr. McDaniel popping back in the office every day, he's a very likable and cheery, bubbly guy. And he would just come to the office like, "Hey, how's everybody doing?" And after the first couple of days of that, I went to the guy he left in charge, and I'm like, "Isn't Mr. McDaniel in Texas? Why is he here every day?" And the guy that they left in charge, I can't remember his name anymore. He just kind of went like this. I do remember that. And he's like, "Yeah, Mr. McDaniel has obligations of the superpower. And if you have obligations of the superpower, you don't get out of those obligations." That was an exact quote. So he was at his own expense flying back and forth between Florida and Texas every day to fulfill whatever these obligations were at the superpower, which I presume that he was auditing people, but I don't actually know. They don't tell. They really tell me. I'm not a Scientologist, but this is like the biggest evidence of like somebody doing something that's like over the top nuts that I encountered anyway. For the like you're in Texas to save your business, but your religion says no, I don't care. We need you here every day. At that point, you should realize there might be something wrong. That's just like. Also, whenever a new movie came out that summer that starred a major Scientologist, McDaniel asked all the computers in the office, everyone changed their desktop background to be a promo from that movie. And that was just in case somebody would come through the offices, which did actually happen once. We did actually have John Travolta come walk through our offices at one time. So yes, I did get to meet John Travolta. That's maybe one small perk of this crazy experience. Also, I stayed late one night and found the as I mentioned before, the WISC manuals, including the list of WISC organizations. I had been told that there were certain books that I wasn't allowed to look at, but I discovered one day that I was the only person working in the office. I was working late. This can happen in software, and it's like 1 a.m. in the morning. And I'm like, this is my chance to go through all their secret Scientology books. I don't remember an awful lot. I didn't take any pictures, but I do remember that this multi-volume set of L. Ron Hubbard's secret books on how to run your business would have the words of L. Ron in green ink. So there was like commentary, and then there'd be an inset paragraph in green ink, which is the actual words of L. Ron. It's very similar, right, to the red letter Christian New Testament, or the words of Jesus are in red. But in this case, the words of L. Ron were in green, and I can only assume that green's for the month. That's all I can say. I guess I would skip this slide on my notes, so I'm just going to read it off here. So the company merged with Master Tech Enterprises, which was actually an arm of the Scientology Church. This happened very late in my employment affair. Scientologists refer to anything L. Ron Hubbard created as a TED. It was L. Ron Hubbard TED. Any of his books are TED. So Mass for Tech Enterprises, the wholly owned subsidiary of the church, they ended up buying this at the end of 2003. Master Tech had actually produced and created the very personality test that I had been initially given when I came to Workday. And once the Master Tech people arrived, who I'm going to heretofore describe as goons, because that's what they looked like and acted like, I overheard one of them talking to the main guy who started Fortis, Mr. McDaniel, about how Fortis was not following WISC procedures, and in particular, they weren't mandated in Scientology readings. So soon afterwards, every Wednesday became reading day. We're not to answer our phone or email or do any actual work. Instead, you're going to go to the break room all day where you're going to be assigned a book to read. And it is your job on Wednesdays to read this book. You cannot put it down. You cannot refuse to read it. It is your job. That's the exact words that they said. It is your job today to read this book. And the book I was assigned, because I'm not a Scientologist, was Learning How to Learn by L. Ron Hubbard. So I immediately decided that I needed a new job. Like this has all been entertaining up until now. Like, yeah, like no, look, Mr. McDaniel was a really nice guy, and he, after the initial week of weirdness where I refused to take the personality test and made it clear to them that I wasn't interested in becoming a Scientologist, he was cool with that, and I never received any flack. I was told that there were these books I couldn't read, and that was about it. But I will say that when he was running the company, I was never forced to read or learn anything about Scientology. But once Master Tech took over and Paul McDaniel was no longer in charge, that's when they started to force me to read Scientology materials. So I immediately decided I needed a new job at that point. While I was looking for work, I tried to come in sick on Wednesdays, but that only works a couple of Wednesdays. So there's another funny and maybe scary story where I took a job interview in Orlando, actually, with the company Music Mash, and some of you may have heard of. I ended up working there after I worked for the Scientologists. And I was interviewing for this job on a Wednesday in Orlando, one of these Wednesdays where I called in sick. But this was like the third Wednesday I'd called in sick, so they decided to come looking for me. I received phone calls while I was in the interview, but I'm not taking any phone calls while I'm in the interview. Then I checked my messages when I came out of the interview, and it's one of these goons from Master Tech. I recognize his voice. Hey, we came to your apartment. You're not there. Where are you? So, I mean, it's funny, but it's also scary as hell. Yeah, so I was definitely glad to leave. I did, I would have left whether I got a new job or not, but I did luckily get the job I interviewed for at Music Mash, and so I, came back and told them that I was leaving. I put in 2 weeks' notice. I will say, and I don't think this is in my slides here, but they really tried to prevent me from leaving. Mr. McDaniel's like, you're the only person that we've been able to hire from Microsoft since we originally founded this company. Please, please, please stay. I'm like, I can't. If you're going to make me read Scientology books, I can't stay. And he's like, well, that's out of my control. And I'm like, well, then I got to go. So, and what I learned from this experience. So I learned just how much of a grip Scientology has on some people. Like in particular, Mr. McDaniel, who, at his own expense, flew back and forth every day between Texas and Florida because the Scientology church told him we had to do that. I also learned that just like any other religion, the level of devotion to the faith varied from follower to follower. Some people were way into it, like Mr. McDaniel. Other people were halfway out of it, like this guy that sat next to me. Again, this was like 15 plus years ago, so I can't really remember. Actually, 20 years ago, so I can't really remember names anymore. But the guy who was sitting in the cube next to me, this guy was practically out of Scientology. He was not doing any of the progression down the bridge and was catching flack from his dad because he wasn't, I learned that the Church of Scientology encourages attempts to indoctrinate people at work, as I've sadly experienced firsthand. I did not, however, learn why the founders of Fortis Software converted to Scientology in the first place. They were very, very smart people. If you've ever worked with a Microsoft technology called ActiveX, Paul McDaniel holds the patents for ActiveX, the guy who founded this company. Brilliant, brilliant engineer. How did he get mixed up in this shit? I'll never know. I just felt like I'm too nice of a guy to ask that kind of question by somebody. You know, I like several of the founders personally, and as curious as I was, I didn't want to put them in the awkward situation of asking them questions about how they got into Scientology, especially since I made it very clear that I did not want to do that personally. And I continued to feel that way even after I decided for sure that I wanted to quit. I still didn't really want to be that guy. I also, really felt that the founders of Fortis, as I said a few minutes ago, they did not actually desire to ram Scientology down my throat. They tried to recruit me, but they didn't give me an ultimatum, join or quit. Which it did feel like the actual, master tech Scientologists did seem to have that sort of manner and attitude. I feel like prior to Master Tech taking over, the folks like McDaniel actually tried to shield me from a lot of Scientology related things that were going on there because he knew that I didn't want it. Once Master Tech took over, the initial founders of Fortis were no longer in control. That's when things became untethered. All right, so this concludes everything that was in my initial presentation when I gave this in 2013, but there's been updates since 2013. So in 2017, Paul McDaniel's wife wrote an entry on the blog of Mike Rinder, an escapee from the Scientology Sea organization, whose blog has many articles intended to help Scientologists escape and cope with life on the outside. In this blog, McDaniel's wife said that she was undergoing OT level 8 level Scientology training. And that's like, the pretty much beyond things I even have learned about, I'm sure. But you definitely have learned the story of Xenu and TGAC and all of those things by the time you're at OT8. So she said that she was undergoing OTA level Scientology training aboard a Sea Org ship. So apparently they do, in fact, still have some boats aboard a Sea Org ship off the coast of Colombia when they tried to convince her to turn over Paul McDaniel's Microsoft 401k to the church on the grounds that he was a horrible human, quote unquote, based on transcripts of his auditing sessions. And I want to tell you, Paul McDaniel was definitely not a horrible human. He was a really good person who I really feel bad about how mixed up he got into this bullshit. I wanted to read the entire blog post that she wrote because I feel like it really helps clarify the pure evil and manipulation of the heart of Scientology. So I don't have this in a slide, so I'm just going to have to read this. So this is titled Checkmate, and it was written by Paul McDaniel's wife. Recovering from Scientology has been no easy task. However, my husband and I did it together. What broke me from the church initially was this. I was on a ship to do OT level 8. I cleared every hurdle placed in front of me. As most of you know, there are many extremely difficult hurdles designed to break you in every possible way. I was on a ship off the coast of Cartagena, Colombia. They had taken my passport and the staff had locked me in the room on the ship for 3 days and kept me in isolation before they read my husband's confidential Scientology files detailing why he was a horrible human worthy of betrayal. This was an attempt to destroy his character with me. After undergoing an entire week of this berating, I was asked to turn over his 401k. Somehow they knew the exact amount of money in his account. Suddenly, everything slapped into clear view. They had set me up to betray my husband. To betray my husband would break me. I refused. I had two choices given these circumstances. I could try to jump off the ship and swim to shore, hoping port authorities would take me to the U.S. Embassy, or I could lie and say that I was going to do it and get off the ship with their compliance. And that's what I did. I told them I would have to go home in order to get the money. After another week of convincing them that I would do it, they let me disembark from the ship on the promise that I would deliver the money and that I would also make sure that all four of my daughters would remain in Scientology even if Paul was being pushed out. When I got home, my husband was disappointed in me. He was disappointed that I didn't complete OT level 8 despite the tens of thousands of dollars they had spent on it. In my own mind, I knew the treacherous truth. Scientology as a whole was a piece of shit. It is all a lie, and I would never, under any circumstances, ever set foot in a Scientology church again. I risked everything, since Scientology is clearly professional at turning everyone against you. Over the years, they've collected tombs full of your thoughts, your experiences, your secrets. You're repeatedly put on the e-meter to divulge everything you know, to unburden your demons and attain spiritual freedom. The common goal of Scientology that you share with everyone you know, all your family, all your friends, and all your business associates. There is no one that you can turn to in crisis if that crisis concerns a lack of faith in Scientology itself. Everyone you know is obligated to turn you into the church if you show any signs of weakness. I had one objective: to keep my husband and my kids, to free them all from the shackles of Scientology. I had to do this secretly and peacefully. Internally, I had to attempt to debug my own mind. The next several years, we were stalked and hounded since obviously we didn't give them the money. On many occasions, church staff parked in front of our house day and night watching us. We were constantly ambushed by people the church said to give us back. They would find us at salons, shopping malls, grocery stores, anywhere we happened to be. We were relentlessly pursued. My husband and I had to undertake a coordinated effort of defense. We tried to hide from it. My sister was even sent to bring us back at least 3 times. My sister was a shining example of a dedicated Sea Org member working in the highest levels of the church management structure. Obviously, she'd be the last person I could turn to with my internal conflicts. Eventually, the friendly stalking stopped, and the church turned to dirtier tactics. They went after our friends, business partners, other family members. The church spread rumors that we were doing wrong, evil, and even sick and perverted things. How we were wayward and needed to be brought to justice for our own good. They got everyone we knew to write the most outlandish, scandalous stories about us in the form of knowledge reports. This is designed to smear your character so they can bring you into their internal justice system. They need zero evidence or proof to do this, only conjecture and lies. Everyone that we knew participated in this process. Reports were turned in by people closest to us. We were called down to Florida in front of their committee. My husband went in an effort to save our family relationships, meaning connection to brother and sister. Since we were being pushed out of the church, we would no longer ever be able to have contact with them ever again. Losing them was unthinkable. I couldn't go back. I called into a calm EV when I was there. I don't know what that is. That's some Scientology thing. I told them I refused to ever go back and get mind-fucked by them ever again. I knew at this point it was only a matter of time before they declared us suppressive and we would lose our family. My husband gracefully accepted our sentencing, but we didn't complete any of it. All this time, he continued working every day to support me, my mom, and our 4 daughters. I'm a housewife fiercely dedicated to our children. Saving them, first and foremost, was the common goal that kept us together and allowed us to weather this storm. When the book Going Clear by Lawrence Wright came out, we were in Zurich, Switzerland. Paul was working there, and I was on my way home from a visit with our eldest daughter, who was attending college in Paris. It was Valentine's Day, and it was snowing outside. We each had a copy of the Going Clear book. We laid in bed and read through it all night. I couldn't put it down. It was our first exposure to the other side of Scientology. We turned to each other in the wee hours of the morning and agreed that we were completely out, which means being completely alone and willing to suffer the consequences of being cut off and apostated. We both fought our own demons over the next few years. It was a very difficult time for us. The church had convinced us that therapy was the source of all evil mankind suffered from. We were lost, hurting, confused. The emotional pain was unimaginable. We struggled. Dozens of people figured out that we weren't going back. We helped give them the support and encouragement they needed to leave themselves. We were surprised how many of our friends we managed to convince to leave along with us. The final blow from the church was about to be delivered. There was nothing we could do to save the relationship with my brother and sister. So I called my brother as the mailman was walking to the door with our declaration order from the church that said that we were banished. I wanted to say goodbye. I said I was sorry that I couldn't stop this from happening. He said he was disappointed in me because I had failed Scientology. My sister-in-law took the phone and started screaming at me for ruining her life and then hung up on. We hit bottom. My sister tried to organize a kidnapping of my mother, who had given up her life to help me raise my four incredible daughters. The church started harassing her. Then they started threatening her, using my sister as a manipulation tool. My brother had a beautiful baby she would be allowed to visit if she just kept her mouth shut. She had struggled to be quiet all these years and to keep the thread of the relationship she had with her children and grandchildren. Since we had nowhere else to turn and the pain was too much to bear, we went into therapy. There were so many triggers, so much pain to process. Over half the time, our therapist couldn't believe the level of abuse and dysfunction that we suffered at the hands of the Scientology Church. We're still in therapy from it. I needed to fight back. I needed to send a message to the church. They don't own me. They can no longer control me. So I spoke to Tony Ortega, and he helped tell some of my more intriguing stories. I went on Leah Remini's show, Scientology: The Aftermath. I wanted that message to be heard loud and clear. I am out, I don't believe anymore, and I am now unfuckwithable. The final retaliation of the church was weaponizing my brother and sister against me. The blow was felt since I have a loyalty to family down to the core of my soul. I will always feel they didn't do this from their own free will. They were completely brainwashed. They're gone. I may never recover from this. But there is nothing else beyond this that Scientology can do to hurt us ever again. We're creating new lives now. Our kids are the most incredible people I know. I'm inspired by them every day. We're both successful in whatever we choose to do. My mother is still with me, and every day gets better. Surviving this process has brought us closer than we ever imagined. Every single day, we have love and support from our extended family and new friends. We are supported and loved. I can't thank everyone enough that rallied behind us. We share an intimate bond that cannot be broken by anyone. We won. Check it. And that, friends, is just like I just feel so bad because I've known these people personally for a year, and they were just such good people. And like you hear stories about Scientology, but like, it's just really shocking, what happened there. Like, I also understand that Paul McDaniel doesn't have any contact with his father because his father would not leave Scientology. So yeah, once you're in, it's hard to leave because while you might wake up from it, your family members may not, and then you're, by the law of the church, can't ever have association with them ever again. Whew. All right, that concludes this presentation.